Miami's Coconut Grove, with its luxury hotels, lavish lifestyles, exclusive restaurants, and its famous sidewalk cafes. A thriving, vivacious suburb of Miami, Florida. Here in Coconut Grove is a community that was established before Miami became a city by a pioneering breed of settlers that rose to the challenge of creating a settlement in South Florida that attracted tourists from the Northeast to this oasis on the bay. British-born Charles Peacock built the Bayview Hotel to accommodate the floods of tourists now coming from the northeastern United States to Coconut Grove. When Peacock needed laborers to facilitate in the operations of his Coconut Grove Inn, he went to Key West looking for that person to help him run his Coconut Grove Hotel. The one name that kept coming up was Mariah Brown, a washerwoman who migrated from the island of Eleuthera in the Bahamas to Key West. Mariah Brown would become a pioneer in the development of Miami, Florida, an American city.
They came coming for her in Key West. They needed somebody to work at the Peacock Inn. And everybody knew Mariah in the community there in Key West. Mariah Brown is the woman you will be very happy to employ.
In Key West, Florida, she met the Peacocks, who asked her to come with them to Miami to start a residence inn.
I don't know Mr. Peacock to this day, but I'm very appreciative of him of giving my great-great-grandmother Mariah Brown a job, because I found out she was a very entrepreneur.
She was very well known and very well respected.
All kinds of people live in Key West, mostly Bahamians, colored and white, doing what they've been doing for hundreds of years, sponging, turtling, fishing, and wrecking. I finds me a place to rent on Emma Street, where Eleutherians live close together and help one another. All I know is, by the time the Peacocks reach Key West, looking for somebody to help them work at a hotel in Coconut Grove, I have 3 little girls, Ella, Lula, and baby Alice. I tells the Peacock, I think on it. By morning, me and my girls were standing on the porch when the Peacocks come. There are only 2 Negroes in Coconut Grove when me and my girls reach. Very soon, I fetch many more from Eleuthera, Nassau, Apico, and Key West.
So then she brought others, to come and build their homes. And so that's how the community developed.
And that's when she called other Bahamians to build houses, and that's how their neighborhood grew.
So Mariah Brown was one of the first Bahamians, might have been one of the first 2 women that Charles Peacock brought to Coconut Grove. I interviewed people when I did my book who were in their 90s who knew Mariah Brown when they were children. And they told me that she was a wonderful woman, that she was a person who a lot of people relied upon in that community. And I was told that she became ill with breast cancer and went back to the Bahamas for treatment because the doctors in Nassau and the Bahamas were better than the doctors here in early Miami. But everything I heard about her led me to believe that she was just an absolute bedrock member of this community.
Peacock Inn spreading. Lots of visitors coming down from the east.
Took a job at the Peacock Inn, which again was a big job provider because it was the only inn in the area. And as the inn prospered, they expanded it, and they also built this bathing pavilion down on the water close to where McFarland would dead him at the bay.
Oh, I beyond grateful to the Peacocks for bed and board. Every day I say, one day, Mariah, you going to build a house on your own. I saves every penny I can.
She saved her money. She did candy. She made candy, sold dinners, throughout the neighborhood. She's one of the persons that today we need more of to look up to.
Lula say, "You are dreaming, Mama." I decide to be a part of it all. Buys me a piece of land if and somebody sells me it. So I yucks up my courage and ask Miss Joseph Fro if and she'll sell me a piece of her land. She says yes. And she say I can pay 50 cents a week. You want to know something? I dream me this small house. It may be small, but it's mine.
Well, what we know with the documentation we have is that Mariah Brown was the first documented Black Bahamian person to come. She came in 1889.
I said, that's my kind of woman, because I had found a woman that I could connect with. I could find a woman that was a role model for my life, and universally so. A woman who was a washerwoman, who washed clothes all day long and went home dog-tired. This to me was what I like to call an uncommon, common woman.
I think it's part of the problem is we don't tell the story, and our young people, and I learned late in life about the story. So I think it's important that we tell the story, and if she could do what she did at that time, there's so much more that we can do with what we have.
As she came to the Grove, she bought the first house. And the first house was located on Charles Avenue, and it still stands today.
She was the only Black woman that built a house, the first house in Miami, in Coconut Grove area.
They started the St. Paul's AME Church in Mariah Brown's house. That's very early.
Shall if it be the same way 100 years from now, Coconut Grove, a fine place to live.
The historic city of Miami Cemetery. Buried here are many of the pioneering families of early Miami. Julia Tuttle, the mother of Miami, who convinced Henry Flagler, the railroad tycoon, to extend the route of his Florida East Coast lines to Biscayne Bay, leading to the founding of the city of Miami. The Burdine family, that created the department store dynasty from a dry goods store. The Peacock family, who in the days before Miami became a city, had the only hotel between Lake Worth and Key West. And Alexander C. Lightbourne, one of the African-American men who signed the charter making Miami a city. It was July 28, 1896, when Lightbourne and more than 300 men met in a building on Avenue D, which is now Miami Avenue. He was one of 162 Black men who voted to incorporate the city. Isidore Cohen, an early resident, was there. He wrote in his memoirs that a darky named Lightbourne delivered the best speech in favor of incorporating the city. But who was A.C. Lightbourne, and what might have been his motivation for giving the speech?
He was a very accomplished person, and Republican Party bigwig during Reconstruction. I mean, the guy was amazing. If you see the inscriptions on the tombstone, you know, he was just a sort of a major force during Reconstruction, which was an era when African Americans had their first opportunity. And one of the founders of Greater Bethel AME Church. He's an unbelievable person.
It's August 23, 1866. The Civil War ended a little over a year ago in 1865, thus putting an end to slavery in the United States. The British Empire ended slavery even earlier in 1838. This was the time of Reconstruction, an exhilarating time for blacks, most of whom were former slaves. Filled with hope and promise, the United States freed slaves and other blacks saw a brief period where things were fairly equal in opportunities between them and whites. On this August day, one 14-year-old young man traveled from the British West Indies island of New Providence, Bahamas. He disembarked the Eliza G. Czar's ship in New York. This is A.C. Lightbourne. By the time Lightbourne ended up in the Miami area, some 30 years later, he racked up an impressive resume even by today's standards. Lightbourne made his way to Tallahassee, Florida. 1868 records from the Freedmen's Bureau show that he was one of 9 teachers in Tallahassee under Colonel John T. Sprague. The name of the school he taught was Bethel. Bethel was the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Tallahassee in 1868.
The churches were very instrumental in forming schools when they did not have school systems available. The AME church pastors were also intimately involved in the politics of Reconstruction on the local level as well as on the state level.
Radical Reconstruction ushered in opportunities for blacks in the area of voting rights and leadership in the new Republican Party.
A lot of the early black legislators in Tallahassee at the time, Constitution Committee, House of Representatives and Senators, they were black AME preachers.
In 1869, while only 17 years old, he was elected as a sergeant at arms in the Florida House of Representatives. During this time, he would have rubbed shoulders with the men seen here. Men like Robert Meacham, Frederick Hill, Washington Pope, and John Wallace. Lightbourne's intelligence and performance brought him to the attention of Governor Harrison Reed. Reed appointed Lightbourne as a Justice of the Peace for Gadsden County in 1871. He was 19 years old. While in Gadsden County, he also sat on the Board of Commissioners. Lightbourne joined the Arnett AME Church in Quincy. It was probably here that he met his wife, Mary Elizabeth Ziegler. They married in 1872. The marriage produced 5 children. In 1873, he became trustee of Quincy AME Church. Lightbourne also worked for the Railway Mail Service. He processed mail en route from Jacksonville to Chattahoochee, then to Pensacola when the railroad extended.
Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows but Jesus.
Although blacks gained access to public offices, they were faced with constant intimidation and violence against them. This came mainly in the form of the birth of the Ku Klux Klan. The KKK arranged a campaign of terror in order to destroy the Republican Party. They were especially active in Florida, where hundreds of blacks and their allies were beaten or killed to suppress the black vote. Reconstruction essentially ended in 1877, and all the rights that blacks gained were taken away by the Democrats. He moved to Jacksonville with his family in 1885 and became master workman for the Knights of Labor Union. In 1888, a yellow fever epidemic broke out through the city of Jacksonville. Lightbourne was appointed to a committee to determine the needs of his community. The Florida State Department of Health was born from this organization. Several of these committee members moved on to permanent positions within the new department. This was not the case for Lightbourne. The events may have started to take a toll on Lightbourne. It was probably this lack of economic opportunities that prompted Lightbourne to move further down the Florida East Coast line. He worked as a teacher in Cocoa and Palm Beach. By 1896, Lightbourne and his family moved to the Miami area. He, along with hundreds of people, had moved in because of news that Henry Flagler was extending his railroad there. While in Miami, in March of 1896, he, along with some colleagues, established one of the leading churches of the city in his home, the Greater Bethel AME Church. All of the events of Lightbourne's life have now led him to this moment on July 28, 1896, when he came to the attention of Isidore Cohen. Was he required to speak? What did he say? Did he hope to have an opportunity based on his abilities? He received his answer almost immediately. Segregation took effect immediately in the city that Lightbourne spoke for so eloquently in his speech. All colored people had no place in the brand new city. They were segregated to the Central Negro District, the upper northwest portion of the city, this place called Colored Town, later called Overtown. Lightbourne remained active as a teacher in Colored Town. In 1897, he became the superintendent for colored schools in Miami. There is one building in Overtown that bears Lightbourne's name. This is the Alex C. Lightbourne building, located on the grounds of the Bethel AME Church. Lightbourne's wife died in 1902. He became paralyzed in 1906. He died in 1908. He was 52 years old. Here in Overtown is the historic Dorsey house. This was the home of the first black millionaire in Miami, Dana Albert Dorsey. Dorsey realized the lack of housing for colored people in Overtown and used his carpentry skills to fulfill that need.
Dana Dorsey was arguably the most influential African American in Miami in the earlier 20th century. He was a real estate owner, a businessman, an entrepreneur, a philanthropist who really changed and impacted the black community in Miami.
He was a marvelous guy. He was a great benefactor of the community, self-made. I mean, if you can become a millionaire with the discrimination that he faced, you got to be something.
A.C. Lightbourne was teaching at the Freedmen's School in Tallahassee in 1868 when Dana Albert Dorsey was born. His parents were former slaves. He received his formal education up to the 4th grade from a school set up by the Freedmen's Bureau in Quitman, Georgia. Between 1890 to 1892, Dorsey moved to Palatka, Florida, and married Rose Campbell. They had one son, Ezekiel Dorsey. Before moving to Miami, Dorsey lived in Titusville, Florida, where he worked as a carpenter for Henry Flagler's railroads. Dorsey arrived in Biscayne Bay around 1897. Some accounts have him in the area even earlier. Since there were no roads to Biscayne Bay, Dorsey built a raft and sailed there alone before the hundreds of blacks who came in with the railroad.
We first see him in the 1900 census, and little by little, he worked his way up from a fruit grower living in Coconut Grove to a real estate owner here in Miami's Overtown, formerly known as Colored Town.
He purchased land in Colored Town and built small single-family homes using Dade County pine. He rented the homes and used the income to purchase more land and build more homes. He married Rebecca Livingston, the daughter of a preacher. She worked as a teacher at a public school and was an accomplished pianist. In 1913, he built his own home an impressive two-story structure, which is now historic property at 250 Northwest 9th Street. Dorsey established the first black bank, the Negro Savings Bank, in 1916, and the first black hotel, the Dorsey Hotel.
He also was really big part of the World War I initiative to recruit African American men to join the Army. And he also organized, talks and parades.
Fisher Island. It's called the most expensive zip code in America. This little island on the southern tip of Miami Beach. The original owner of this property is D.A. Dorsey.
So D.A. Dorsey bought Fisher Island in 1918. The purpose of Fisher Island was to build a black resort for the middle black upper class in order for people to enjoy the beaches, because due to Jim Crow laws and segregation, blacks were not allowed to go to the beach. Even people, a lot of think about Virginia Key, but Virginia Key was not open too much later. And his whole goal was to build a black resort where people can ferry over from the mainland to Fisher Island and enjoy, the outdoors. However, it is said that he was forced to sell his property after a year because the city officials were not in accordance with his plans.
It is also said that he lent money to the Burdine family during the Depression to help keep their store open.
I believe it's true. I wrote a biography of the Burdine family, and I believe that's true, based on what I've researched. It wasn't as much information I would have liked, it wasn't letters or financial ledgers or stuff like that, but it seemed pretty solid information. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
The Burdine's department store was the most successful department store in Florida before its absorption into the Macy's brand. This is Susie August Dorsey. Records from the 1935 census showed that Dorsey and his wife adopted her. Susie later changed her name to Dana Dorsey Chapman.
The D.A. Dorsey school was open in the mid-30s, and it was actually open for around 20 years, and it was the second black high school in Miami. Prior to that, the only high school was Booker T. Washington High School, and due to the population boom, there was a limited space and occupancy in Booker T. Washington, and after 20 years, due to integration, the school closed down. The park was donated to Miami-Dade County in 1941, shortly after his passing, and it was the first city-owned park that was designated for the colored students of Miami. Prior to that, there was only a community library, and there was no city-owned library that was solely designated for African Americans. And due to Jim Crow laws, black students could not go to the main public library. They were not allowed to go. And the agreement that the Dorsey estate made with the city was that this land was only to be used for educational purpose for Miami's black community.
By the time of his death, D.A. Dorsey owned oil fields in Tallahassee and Louisiana, land in Cuba and the Bahamas, and up and down the Florida Peninsula.
When D.A. Dorsey died in 1940, he was a big prominent member of not only the African American community, but the white community. So when he passed away, flags were lowered, not only in the colored side of town, but also in other parts. So that just speaks to the volume that he crossed the color line. He made an impact. He was a really well-known man.
Dorsey is buried here, in Lincoln Memorial Park. He was 72 years old. But his death created a modern-day drama over his estate that continued for years.
So there is a saying I've heard from some of the older members of the community that a lot of white children went to school on Dorsey's money. A lot of people did not know about his son that came out of his first marriage. And when he passed away, there was a claim that his son was entitled prior to his estate. And they actually took around almost 10 years to find him. His name was Ezekiel Dorsey. He was not all mentally sound. His son really did not seek the fortune. He was actually convinced by third parties to seek part of the estate. You actually have to see some of the key players that were involved. And because of that, a legal battle ensued. It was a fight between him, Ezekiel Dorsey, and Dana Dorsey. Mayor Foster Ingle was the mayor of Hollywood, and he was one of the key individuals who was pushing for Ezekiel to get to his estate. He never actually handled the estate. He was appointed guardianship due to his mental state, and that's an interesting story because Mayor Foster Ingle was appointed guardianship of Mr. Ezekiel Dorsey. Ezekiel never really saw the money himself. They just set him up with a house and made sure that he got everything which he requested, was just soda, some candy.
Zeke inherited $215,000 in 1952. 5 years later, he was dead, with only $95,000 of his estate remaining. How did a simple laborer spend $120,000 in 5 years?
Well, he didn't. When Ezekiel Dorsey passed away, it was noted in newspaper that basically all he wanted from his estate was just a place to live, some soda pop, and some candy. So that just begs the question, who really was behind the scene and benefited from the money? And then after the court proceeding, where did the money go? So they basically used, took advantage of Mr. Ezekiel Dorsey's mental situation and got the money. So after he passed away, there were a couple of parties interested in Mr. Ezekiel Dorsey's estate.
4 competing wills came to light, ranging from Zeke's maternal relatives in Palatka to a woman that he worked for. In addition, his guardian, Mayor Ingalls, and the attorney who conducted the search for Zeke previously had claims of unpaid expenses.
And then the rest of the money was basically later used and divided to his court-appointed steward and guardianship, and then also Mayor Ingalls and some of the attorneys that were part of the original lawsuits.
It was men of vision like Dana Albert Dorsey, and men of action like Alexander C. Lightbourne. And of course, women like Mariah Brown that anchored and laid the foundation for the African American communities that would become a part of the fabric of Miami, Florida, an American city.